I felt sure in every emotional way, but in zero logical ways, that my death was inevitable, right like now, like in seconds or minutes. It was impending. I've been to the hospital before for some quad shots where they flayed open my quad and they drained and took a crap load of fluid out. Still have the scar from that one. And I remember having arguments with my wife, someone I care about more than pretty much everyone in this world. Typically when my wife and I argue, never yelled at each other. Some of the stuff that bubbled up to me was like, what if do I have to put up with this? I could just leave. We could just get a divorce. That's what my brain was like. This is a good idea. Try it. What the hell? How come nobody told me about this? Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for RP Strength. Today I have a few fun stories for you, but they're not so fun. Well, they weren't for me anyway when I was going through them. Steroids. I have taken them before. I've had some good experiences, and I've had some not so good experiences. So I'm here to share some of those not so good experiences, and it's not to scare you away from doing steroids. We don't do fear tactics on this channel. We don't do BS on this channel. We do our stupid, not so correct, but heartfelt attempt at a balanced take. And balance means you talk about the good stuff and you talk about the bad stuff too. So here's the thing. Steroids get you much more jacked, that's for sure. You won't be hearing me tell you that they don't work, because anyone who tells you they don't work is either lying or simply misinformed and repeating a falsehood. Steroids absolutely work to enhance your muscularity and your strength, have all kinds of variety of other positive effects in some contexts on your mood, on your ability to recover, on your aggression, on your confidence. This can all be really good things. You know, that's why people take drugs, because drugs have upsides. I used to sit in drug education class in middle school and wonder why people did drugs at all. And only decades later did someone actually manage to tell me it's because they make you feel good. But that story of drugs making you feel good, which is true for almost all drugs, and for steroids is true that they have awesome effects on your physique in most cases, there is sometimes a paucity of dark sides that are discussed. We won't skip that part here. We're going to tell you about the dark stuff as well. Here's the thing. Many folks see obvious benefits in how fitness influencers can look with steroids. But very few of those fitness influencers are willing to talk about downsides of steroids. Maybe this is a thing that's going to be more and more public. But I'll be the first person to so selflessly, for your benefit, of course, I receive nothing from this except for tons of money from views and AdSense revenue and an overly inflated ego to pretend that I matter from a large number of subscribers so I can look at it at night and cry for my usual prophylaxis. But I do want to hook you guys up with a taste of how things can not go so well on steroids, stories you might not have heard before. And these will all be stories from my own personal experience, legit things that just happened to me. It's not hearsay. And I'll give you 3 stories this time around, let you dig into them and think about what's going on, maybe laugh at my expense, hopefully laugh at my expense. And then we'll talk a little bit about how these stories map onto reality and what you can take from them and what maybe is a little much. It was just individual to me. So first story is of my first steroid shot ever. I was in my dingy, Scott, what's an apartment called when it's not a 1-bedroom, it's not efficiency apartment?
Yes, and the kitchen's in there too.
It's one room, and charitably 2, because then there's a bathroom, and that's it. And I had a friend present with me who sort of taught me how to shoot up drugs, and I was in there sticking the needle into the quad. And I was like, 1950s kid. Oh boy, this is going to make me strong and popular. I'll finally get a girlfriend. Gee whiz, that'll be so fun. We'll go on dates and we'll go on carnival rides, and I'm going to be trend out of my mind. So I'm going to be able to rip the carnival into pieces and be shot to death by the police. I didn't have all those thoughts, but it all happened in that exact voice and 50s kid mentality. I thought, hey, gee whiz, let's get this done. Needle went into my quad. I'm not really averse to needles a ton. So I was like, this sucks. A lot of people have a real hard time with that part. Shot the liquid or the oil in, pulled out the needle, blood just goes everywhere. The guy with me passes out. I'm kidding. That part's not true. So no crazy blood. And I was like, oh, okay. very well, doing okay. And then me and that friend of mine, who I'm still great friends with, by the way, we went and visited some friends of his in a different state on the way sort of to driving to another place. And I remember this was a day later, I got out of the car and I was like, oh, geez, like my quad that I shot feels like there's like a giant pin still stuck in there. And anytime I move my quad around, it really hurts. A day later, that pain began to radiate all the way around my quad and even through my knee. My quad was significantly swollen. There was redness at the site. And all of a sudden, I'm looking through Google and I'm like, oh shit, I have an infected quad. It meets like 8 out of the 10 criteria of an infection. I'm going to die. I'm going to get a few more days. If it gets really out of hand and if I see any streaking, which is like the various blood vessels and lymph fluids actually like visibly streak towards and away from the wound, I'm for sure going to the hospital. So the streaking never happened. And it turns out I never had an infection, except with no infection whatsoever. I couldn't bend my leg but a few degrees without excruciating pain for a week and a half. And I'm not kidding. It was a week and a half straight. I had to skip leg training that week. I could feel the fluid in my knee. Like I could touch my knee. It was like, because all the fluid from the immune system infiltration of that like very aggravated area had over a few days floated down into my knee. It was weird to walk because there's too much fluid in the joint capsule. The whole thing was just insane. And I was like, how? Later, I did my other quad and basically the same thing happened. What the hell? How come nobody told me about this? Now, it turns out there was nothing wrong with the bacterial side. There was no infection in any of the situations. And I kept pinning my shoulders, injecting steroids into my shoulders, into my quads, into my glutes, and they would just swell up the entire time, everything. The only thing that eventually made a change for me to where I wasn't constantly swollen from my injections was I ended up switching to insulin syringes, which are teeny tiny and disrupt the area much less. And also I had eventually gone through a few suppliers, let's call them drug dealers, which people, I think, doing a very moral thing, providing people with enhancing products, by the way. I think drug law is almost all of it incredibly immoral, especially for performance-enhancing substances like steroids, which hurt nobody else, barely hurt you if you use them properly. So that aside, eventually I got to a source that was making higher quality gear, and I was using insulin syringes, and if my body just kind of gave up immune system. I was like, I've seen this enough. Every now and again, especially lately when I had been using steroids even a few years back, I would get this occasionally, but it really got much better. But during the times where I have inflammation and swelling, I mean, this was like almost a decade of every few shots, I would get a really, really inflamed shot and it would blow up on me. It would turn red. I've been to the hospital before for some quad shots where they flayed open my quad and they drained and took a crap load of fluid out. And it turns out they did the tests. They're like, yeah, it's actually a sterile abscess. So short of your leg almost exploding, nothing bad was going to happen to you. Still have the scar from that one. And a lot of times your immune system gets so crazy with these exogenous oils that your body's not supposed to be recognizing in itself. It attacks them with everything, including a systemic response. So you guys will look up, you see something called Tren flu, test flu. It's when you have a fever, malaise, headache, like you feel like you have the flu except for the cough and the sneezing part, and your whole body's weak. All your joints hurt like shit. Your training goes to hell if you're doing it at all. And whatever muscle group you injected is non-functional, like dead arm, dead leg. And I wish it was just dead. But if someone like in a car, like takes their seatbelt, plugs it in and accidentally elbows it into the quad, you're like, ah! It's the worst pain ever. This is a constant thing that I went through for a really, really, really long time. And a lot of folks watching this have been through a ton of this stuff. So you guys in the comments, tell us your worst stories about pinning. And it's just a thing that happens. So the romantic side is you take steroids, something, Steve Rogers, Captain America, and then you're awesome and you have the girl. The reality is some of this shit is true, but also like they really screw you up, not in a big way that's going to affect you. It's just a lot of real annoying nuisance, terrible stuff. That's story number one. Story number two. I took Tren for the first time. And the typical recommendation at the time that I was hearing was, You start at 75 milligrams of Tren. Tren, by the way, is an incredibly powerful steroid. You start with 75 milligrams of Tren every other day. And usually you work up from there to 150 or whatever kind of crazy ass dose you're going to take. So I started at 75 because it was told to me by several people this is a conservative dose. Most people respond well. One day later, I walked home from work. I got to my efficiency apartment and I felt sure in every emotional way, but in zero logical ways, that my death was inevitable and gonna happen real soon. I was for sure gonna die right like now, like in seconds or minutes. It was impending. I got that emotion of the inevitability and proximal presence of death just as an emotion by itself, untethered completely from any context. I was walking, my heart rate was totally fine. I was in perfectly good health outside of the Tren, but it doesn't kill you instantly, not even close. And I just knew that I was going to die. And it was such an intense feeling. I opened up my laptop, I opened up a Word document, and I just started writing what it was feeling like. I think I still have that somewhere. Like, what does it feel like to be this way? The anxiety was overwhelming, like a giant tidal wave anxiety picked my ass up, threw me against the rocks, picked my ass up again, threw me against the rocks. It was wild. It was like the emotion of, but like over and over and over for hours. And then I was like, damn, this shit may not be for me. I talked to a friend of mine after. I was like, dude, I'd have to like back up off of Tren because this is clearly not working. He's like, well, how much did you take? This guy is a neuroscientist, never messed with drugs or steroids or anything ever in his life. And I was like, well, 75. And he's like, well, and I was like, I could go to 37.5, but like 0.5 of a milligram, like why even bother? He's like, why don't you go to a quarter of the dose? And I was like, 18.75 of Tren? He's like, uh-huh. I was like, why? He's like, why not? Clearly you go way too much on one end. Try a low end. I was like, oh my God, I can't tell my friends about this. 18.75 is embarrassing. Took 18.75 every other day for a week and a half. Felt way better. Body started to change. Tren is real. Took 37.5 for another week and a half, 3-week total intro cycle to Tren. Pulled the plug on Tren. I was at the end of a fat loss phase, got everything I needed. It really did transform my body significantly in 3 weeks. But what I realized was whatever amount of steroids people tell you to do, it's always a good idea to do like way less than that. And at worst case, if just nothing happens after a few weeks, you can always increase the dose. But if you go high or just moderate to where most people thinking it's too high for you, it's just a really nasty experience you don't have to have. So come back down. That's true with a lot of medications, especially true with anabolic steroids. So really, really nasty. And every time I did Tren since then, it was much milder of a response because I knew how to start low, but it's just been no fun. Tren is just no fun to do in almost every case that I've ever done it in. And it's funny, nowadays, a lot of the modern prep coaching, especially the prep coaches that advocate what's called a safer use model, just, trying to take steroids in a way that still gives you good results, but doesn't necessarily kill you right away. A lot of what those guys are recommending is instead of running hundreds of milligrams of Tren per week, which would be, 200 milligram injection at a time or more, actually doing much less Tren just in the last month on the way into a show to have that extra edge to lose zero muscle while you strip the very last bit of fat away and then have that very low fatigue environment. So it turns out that 18.75 every other day, it turned out to be a real smart decision that I wish I would have known sooner. But the problem with drugs is all this underground shit. A lot of stuff you read in the forums and on the internet, it just ends up being just, good advice for the average, but the average is just like, maybe a third of the population or a fourth. Everyone else, it's sometimes really bad advice for. So that's story number 2, real fun times. Last story. This one is a bit more recent. So higher doses. This was when I was competing in bodybuilding last summer, depending on when you see this video, summer of 2024. So my last hurrah with bodybuilding until I taking a little break, and then I will be coming back. Depending on when you see this video, I should be back at some point if my body's still in one piece around, summer of 2026. I'm going to be stepping on stage again. Hopefully, I'm really excited about that. But 2024 summer, I was doing, pretty hefty doses, some gnarly compounds. And I remember having arguments with my wife. And so typically when my wife and I argue, so we never yelled at each other a single time. And we never get crazy, but some contentious things are said. And, we're always trying to balance speaking freely while also not really offending the other person or saying things that, you don't want out on the ether. The thing about saying stuff to someone you care about or even someone you don't is you can take back things that you say by saying, okay, I take that back. I didn't mean it. But the way human psychology works is that person isn't ever really 100% going to believe you that you can take it back. My highest recommendation to you in most of life is there is a difference between what's in your brain, it's in your mind, and what it is appropriate to put out into the ether of reality for other people to hear. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be expressing yourself, but it means that some of the stuff that you're going to express yourself with is going to be really nasty stuff that if you were in a different frame of mind, you might be like, I don't really think like that at the bottom end of the rung. Like fundamentally, I disagree with what I said, which you can deal with yourself much easier than you can tell other people. Hey, remember that thing I told you was really nasty? I didn't mean the thing. Well, in the future, anytime you say anything, they're going to have to be like, is this a person who meant the thing or is this the person who didn't mean the thing? You generally want to have a good policy in your life for the most part of anything that really comes out of your mouth, especially as you get older and wiser, to be things only that you really mean and not things that you don't really mean. And so with this in mind, I'm talking to my wife. And as you guys probably can figure out, if you've ever met me in real life, I go, man, I'm very verbose. I can always gotta find something to say and I can always stream of thought, anything. And it's no problem. I don't have to be silent. But the story here is I'm sitting on the couch with my wife and we're having a kind of contentious discussion. And I'm spending minutes, and I mean minutes, like plural, like 2 minutes after her question or response saying nothing. But we're still arguing. You guys ever seen someone argue like that? Where someone says like, well, okay, but like what I really want from you is X, Y, Z. What do you think? And the person who she's saying that to, they're like, but for 2 minutes. And I mean 120 seconds. Scott, people say like, I'll be back in a minute. They never mean a minute. They mean like 20.
Yes.
But like when someone said, yeah, and then he didn't say anything for 2 minutes, they usually mean like 10 seconds or something, which 10 seconds of pause in a conversation is a long time. Really 2 minutes is insane. Most people are like, are you still talking to me? That's how long in multiple conversations that summer that I had to take a pause. Why? Because I have that thing. I don't do it perfectly all the time, but I try. Never say anything you're going to want to take back, which means that all the stuff that pops into my head to want to say, if it's really important, and I'm not like on a podcast where you can't just pause for 2 minutes, and it's someone I care about more than pretty much everyone in this world, my wife, I am not going to allow temporary drug-induced toxicity to spew at her face. I won't do it. And so she gave me some things to think about, and none of these were very mysterious things. But when you're on a lot of androgenic drugs, or at least when I was on a lot of them, all of the candidate hypotheses, all of the propositions where my brain goes, hey, buddy. I'm like, yeah. Brain's like, yeah, say this next. Try this, right? So you don't really so much come up with, you're not really the author of many of your thoughts. You're kind of just the editor. Like the thought bubble comes up and you're like, the f- what I say that for? Give me something else. And it's like, okay, what about this? You're like, too mean. What about that? And a lot of times you can have editorial control and actually select the good stuff, leave the bad stuff, and then get something to pop out of your mouth. But I was so up on so much androgenic steroid that all of the thoughts I had coming out of me, all of the things I wanted to say were really nasty and evil. And I didn't really think them at the end of the day. I just felt them right then and there. Like some of the stuff that bubbled up to me was like, just straight up, F you. That was like a thought that was like, I should share this with her. Like she said all this meaningful shit that really was deep and really wanted like an intellectual response. And my response was going to be like, F you. Like, that's what my brain was like. This is a good idea. Try it. Because your brain gets wacky when you're on a lot of drugs. And it says, like, yeah, this is good. Be really violent or really aggressive. You're like, but that's the wrong idea. The brain's like, I wish I had other ideas. That's just all I got right now, man. Like, because, enough testosterone and Tren and all that stuff just pushes on your amygdala to squirt out really nasty kind of neural priming to tell your top end networks to like spit out real nasty stuff. It happens in your thoughts. It happens in the things you say. Some of the other thoughts that came to mind were just like, nope. She'd be like, what do you mean no? Now, mind you, this never happened because I never said these things, but it'd be like, just no, just everything you have to say, no. Then like grandiose shit, be like, don't you think I could just lie to you? Don't you think I could convince you of anything? Another one is like, why the f- do I have to put up with this? I could just leave. We could just get a divorce. I could just go and I could never come back. I don't have to deal with any of this shit. Every thought was some version of nasty for 2 minutes straight until it could quiet the mind enough to be like, Israel, you got to say something. Really dig into your logic. What is logically true here? Because I want to say things heartfelt, things like, I hear you and I accept what you're saying. And I think you have a lot of correct shit that you're saying, but I don't feel any of that at the time. I feel hatred and anger and rage and rebelliousness. That's all I feel, but I know that's not the right thing. So the result is I just don't say anything. And my wife was like, why aren't you saying anything? And I'm like, everything I could say is bad. I don't want you in there. I don't want the toxicity spilling all over you. I don't want that for you. And she's like, okay, sit there a little longer, eventually get out some words. Usually when I talk to my wife, I talk to everyone, I can't shut the fuck up. And I'm plenty of nice things to say. It was not the case on a few occasions. And that's like really messed up. So it took someone like me, who's typically very good at communicating in relationships, get the whole feminicide bullshit. I got all kinds of feelings. It's great. No more, just hatred and anger and despair and just wanting to bring someone else down with me. That's what I really felt in my heart of hearts right then and there. So 2 pieces of insight. 1, androgenic steroids will fuck you up. 2, not everything you feel in the moment is truly revealed wisdom about how you intend to be a person out in the world. So when people say things like always trust your instincts, like that's probably some of the worst advice you can get. I'll say the vast majority of people that always trust their instincts are in jail. Someone rear-ends you, your instinct is to go out and just beat them to death. And some people try that sort of thing. That's what road rage is for. Remember, every instance of road rage is completely irrational. And so people who trust their feelings a lot, when they're really good people and they're mild-mannered, they go all the way through life and just like blowing up on someone once or twice, no big deal. You throw androgens in the mix, anabolic steroids, and you're the wrong kind of person for that. All of a sudden, man, you're going to be thinking some thoughts that you're like, oh my God, this is not for public consumption. And that's a good thing. So you're going to have to zip the lip, get a little quieter, keep the shit to yourself. So say nice things, neutral things, thoughtful things, or nothing at all is generally good practice. I've absolutely not done that my entire life. When I do that, things go a lot better. So here's the deal. Those are the 3 scenarios. Am I unique? Does this kind of stuff only happen to me? It doesn't only happen to me, but I am very unique. Absolutely. I'm Russian. I got all kinds of demons in there. Some of them Russian demons, some of them just my demons. And so I have a real nasty streak. I have a real mean streak. You might have seen it before, me talking about some other folks back in the day. And so for me, some kinds of high dose androgens combined with very high stress makes me a real nasty person. And I'm also quite introspective. So I'm very aware of these things. So I can talk about them on podcasts and people go, holy shit, this guy's f***ed up, and they're not wrong. So yes, I am unique, and a couple of the psychological effects of steroids affect me much worse than they do many other people. To that end, could you do anabolic steroids yourself and never get any of these downsides that I described, this crazy psychological stuff and these big inflammatory events and all that jazz? Absolutely. It is very possible that you just never have to deal with it. Why? Responses are individual. Some individuals get some side effects, some get others. Some don't. Responses are on a spectrum, which means you can have an undetectable negative response, mildly negative, moderately negative, severely negative, insanely life-altering, all the way to cataclysmic, and everything in between, depending on who you are, how the shit strikes you. You never can tell until you use it. Big warning there. Here's the thing. Furthermore, to kind of make that description a little bit more complex, but more nuanced and informative for you, Some people get some side effects and not others. Some people will have test flu, their bones will hurt, but their injection sites are hunky-dory. Some people get crazy psychological side effects, but their blood work is A-okay. Some people, it's the reverse. For me, my blood work on steroids was always phenomenal, but my psychological sides were like a gigantic walking nightmare for years on end. Different strokes for different folks. Some people get more total side effects, some fewer. Some people are super lucky. They do steroids and they get like their HDL cholesterol, good cholesterol drops by a few points. That's really the only measurable thing that's wrong with them. They feel great. Everything's great. Just, oh man, to be so lucky. Some other folks get basically every side effect that we've ever established in medical literature and a few curious ones that we didn't even know people got and everything in between. So it's not a dependable thing to think, oh man, like when I take steroids, I'm going to have these side effects, but definitely this is what I'm going to get. You could get some of them. You could get something in between. You get all of them and so on and so forth. And for any side effect you do get, you can get a bit or a lot of one side effect. Some people, their hairline recedes a little bit. It stops receding. Then you're good to go. Some people go completely bald. Some people grow almost no body hair extra from steroids. Some people turn into Chewbacca like I did and just grow hair out of their eyelids. So some side effects, it's not like you're going to get a side effect or you're not. You're going to get side effects or you're not. But on top of that, the side effects could be turned all the way up to an 11 or all the way down to a 1 or a 0.5. So when you're thinking about, oh man, maybe I want to use steroids, remember how they're going to affect you with a side effect profile is a gigantic roll of the dice. And you never can tell. Could go pretty well for you. Could go not so great. Could go very poorly and everything in between. Another thing. I'm open about this kind of stuff. I don't know why. Who knows? But I feel like it's necessary for me to tell you these stories, or at least beneficial to somebody. Many of the people using anabolic androgenic steroids are also very open. But some people are not very open, some for very understandable reasons. They have contracts with major companies. Those companies don't like them talking about steroids because it makes it look like the Super Wonder protein powder didn't build the physique. It was the steroids. These folks are from traditional times in the 90s when traditional media was the only media. If you told people you were on steroids, no newsroom would ever invite you in because you were a derelict, degenerate criminal. Now with social media, it's a little different. It's much more permissive, but some people are just like, it's just nothing I do. Steroids are illegal. So technically, when you're saying I did steroids, you're admitting to a crime that you committed. It's not a terribly insane crime, but they can pop you for various shit. And also like admitting that you were a former criminal is like a bit weird. So, there's perception stuff. Some people have a reputation that they like to have, and they don't like steroids being discussed, even though everyone kind of knows they're using them, but they sort of don't want to admit it. So they just stay hush about it. So we kind of assume from almost everyone that clearly uses steroids, but doesn't talk about it, that they're doing okay. But some of those people are doing okay. Some are having a tough time and some are having an unbelievably difficult time. And for most of them, you'll never know. A lot of them just don't talk about it on social media. But if you're friends with them or you're friends with their friends, they're like telling you, dude, holy shit, I'm about to end this whole. I know of people who have considered quitting all of it multiple times during various contests, preps, or off seasons where they blast their gear like, this, I'm not doing any of this ever again. They sort of like lower the dose, pick up the pieces, fall in love with the sport again, try it again. They just don't talk about it on social media. But just because they don't talk about it on social media doesn't mean it's not happening, because behind closed doors, they're like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Another thing is some of people don't talk to anyone else but themselves, but in their head, they have a conversation. They know exactly how bad it is. And some of those people quit outright, or when they're done with bodybuilding, years later, they'll talk about how terrible it was. Some people have that voice in their head that's like, you're not doing so well, but they don't even admit it to themselves. They know they're not doing well, but they won't look in the mirror and be like, no one's around. I'm not doing well. They won't do that. They have to maintain the party line, which is just keep going forward. Commendable in some respects, but also will cost you because you realize you were miserable for years and did nothing about it. And it gets worse still in at least one other way. Some people can't even tell they're having those side effects because to them, everything seems quite normal. Your brain is an unbelievable sense-making organ, and sometimes to its detriment. It'll make sense out of things that you're doing that'll make it seem perfectly rational. Like if you talk to a lot of drunk people, Scott, you remember dealing with drunk people every now and again when you were younger. You notice that a lot of people, when they drink, they're not like, you're like, hey, like, can you answer a question? They're not like, oh man, I'm too drunk, I don't know. Drunk people are like, hell yeah, I can. And they'll just get it wrong. They like fully believe they're like quite able to do everything. Overconfident, or just like no less confident when they should be a lot less confident about their abilities. And so just the same way that the brain is like, no, I got this. It'll do that when you have subconscious tendencies. And sometimes it won't even notice, especially if you're not very introspective, which not all of us are. So like a lot of guys, for example, don't think steroids make them like more of an asshole, right? And I've seen guys on social media say this, like, oh man, it has no effect on me. And I've seen other people DM me and be like, I can tell you that's not true because I met that guy in the gym and he is just a raging Tren addict douchebag. And you're like, what? I know guys that say they're totally fine on gear, but their girls say a different story, talking about borderline violent type of shit, being scared of the guy. But when you tell the guy, listen, you're off your rocker, he's like, no, I'm not. I feel perfectly fine. And here's the crazy thing. He does feel perfectly fine because his reference frame for how he usually feels just kind of adjusted and floated up over the course of that steroid cycle. Only later, sometimes when they come off steroids or go to lower doses, do they look back and they're like, I really said that stuff? At the time, it seemed normal, but man, in retrospect, that shit is crazy. Some people don't even reflect like that. So a lot of times when guys say, well, I don't deal with this kind of psych stuff, the answer in reality is like, dude, that's awesome. But God bless you. But some people are like, nah, man, I never got those kinds of sides. All their friends are like, sure. Because everyone knows they do. They just don't want to admit it to other people or themselves or anything in between. Some really do have an easier time. So I'm not saying any of these things that I described are going to happen to you. I'm not saying don't do steroids. But here's the big kicker, guys, and the best possible news to end this episode with. RP hypertrophy app, I'm kidding. Link in description, of course. This is going to come out, Scott, in the year 2025, correct?
Yes.
Currently, just one company, there are no doubt many others, called Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, you can look it up, has a drug in stage 2 clinical trials, which means primates have used it and humans have used it and nobody died. And they got amazing effects. And now they're in stage 2 clinical trials. This drug is a combination of 2 drugs, a myostatin inhibitor and an activin inhibitor. And those 2 compounds are radical muscle growth blocking pathways in your body. The activin pathway and the myostatin pathway like clamp down crazy muscle growth all the time, barely hanging on. And these inhibitor drugs, 2 drugs in one vehicle at the same time, uncork both of those and give you radical muscle growth, some degree of muscle growth that is either comparable to steroids or in most cases and at high enough doses, leave steroids way behind. Here's the kicker. These drugs will be in public market, man, at the latest, for the love of God, FDA, 2028, probably sooner, just a few years away, fellas. They're going to give you pure skeletal muscle hypertrophy with some probably curious side effects, a few people here and there experience, but fundamentally an order magnitude less side effect and maybe almost none than anabolic steroids. They're going to have pretty much either zero or no detectable psychological side effects. There, no liver value stuff, hardly ever, maybe at all. Blood pressure, all that stuff. Just not how those drugs work. There are almost pure muscle building and muscle saving drugs, and they're almost here. I started using steroids like, more than a decade ago because it's the only thing that really worked to gain muscle once you were through your creatine. But these new drugs, and I've been talking about, they're inevitable. And now they're here. They're almost here. So if you see this video, you're an older person, you should be wise enough to know what the right thing is. If you're a younger person, just wait. Just wait. And just in a few years or less, we'll have these non-androgenic anabolic drugs, non-side effect having pure muscle growth drugs. And they're going to do to muscle gain what Ozempic and tirzepatide and retatrutide, those drugs that make you eat less, the modern weight loss drugs, what they did to people's weight loss. You just take the shot and all of a sudden you kind of lose as much weight as you want, sort of. That is going to happen with muscle. It is going to be beautiful, and you won't need to mess with crazy, toxic, sometimes not toxic, sometimes very toxic anabolic and androgenic steroids like I did. You don't want to end up like me. The YouTube fame is fun and all, but look at my hairline. What hairline, you might ask? Exactly. And I'll see you guys next time.